Today on the Mr. Maple Show, we'll be discussing introductions by MrMaple.com called the Area 51 Collection, Plants That Are Out of This World.
Guys, welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. This is your Japanese maple talk show. I'm Matt. Got my brother Tim here in studio with me today, and we're going to be getting into one of our favorite topics. It's a little bit about us, but we're going to be talking about our Area 51 collection from Mr. Maple. Now, you're listening to this podcast. You probably already found us on some different platforms, but you can find us on all major podcast platforms. We're going to be on Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, iTunes, so many different things. Guys, check us out on there. We greatly appreciate you following us also on the Mr. Maple Show on YouTube.
And also on Amazon Music. I thought it was amazing last week whenever I said, hey, Alexa, play the Mr. Maple podcast. And Alexa went and found it and started playing our podcast from last week. So super excited about this new podcast. I know it's been a long time in the making. There's a lot of work going into this process. We've got Sean, who's got our intro. A shout out to Sean again. He's also helping a little bit with Brian on trying to help us figure out all the audio and get the very best that we possibly can. You may notice our new mics. We've switched to some dynamic mics.
Yeah, I came through too big and burly and loud and boisterous on the last one, I was told. So we've fixed my loud man syndrome here. I've quieted me down a little bit in the mic. So hopefully our audio is sounding better for you guys today. We plan on just making this better and better every single time we do it and improving it. And guys, we've got some crazy stuff lined up on this podcast. We're going to be doing some interviews. I don't want to say too much yet till we have them officially dated and scheduled and recorded, but we've got some incredible stuff for you guys coming up on this podcast. We look at this as the channel to do the things that we want to watch. So Tim and Brian and I, we're trying to cover the kind of content we want to watch and also just give you a Japanese maple talk show. That's what the Mr. Maple Show is all about.
So to give you a brief history about the Area 51 collection, Matt and I would go to garden shows, and we would be at garden shows or we'd be at tailgate markets. And we would load up our cool plants, head out to the tailgate market or head up to a garden show in Nashville, Tennessee, or in Columbia, South Carolina, and we'd go out and sell plants directly to the public. And while we were at the public out doing that, Dad would sometimes help some customers back at home.
Right. So this kind of came about as a joke from our friend Richard Bomar, who was really influential in our nursery early on. And he said, I want access to that Area 51. I don't want to know where all the good stuff's at. And so we kind of had to hide some stuff so Dad didn't sell the only one of one thing that we were evaluating while we were gone. You know, a lot of people joke, they say, I'm going to come there when your dad's there and I'm going to go get that very first one of something. And so oftentimes those plants would be early on. They'd be in our evaluation process. We would be looking to name them. They may not even be a full cultivar yet. For sure, it's something that's just in that early stages. Oftentimes when we're evaluating a plant, there may be 6 or 7 different versions of one that are similar sister seedlings or comparable to it, and they all might not make the cut. So some of those may be their sister seedlings to something like Dragon Master, and we're looking through those, and not all of them are going to get cultivar status, just one. So we want to make sure it's the premium one. So we wanted to make sure just the very best thing got out there. That's what that Area 51 is all about, hiding the best stuff till we can figure it out and get it sorted.
Now, you can actually go on our website and find the Area 51 collection on our website. Now, you may be familiar with our catalog and how there's filters that you can work through there. But if you click on Maple Info at the very top, then you go click on the Mr. Maple files. That is all the plants that aren't even listed right now that we may be sold out of, listings there as well. So you can go back and check out the descriptions and see photos of some plants that aren't currently available. Some of them may be available, but they might not be. They may be sold out as well. And then you can go to the filter section by Area 51 Mr. Maple collections. And if you do that, you can pull up our Area 51 collections here at Mr. Maple.
Hey, if you're listening on a podcast platform, it's a great way to follow along. We're going to talk about some of our introductions alphabetically here today. And that's a great way to get a good visual for this one if you're not watching us on the YouTube channel. It's also a great way to get pictures of each individual plant if you're watching on the YouTube channel too. But that's a great way to follow along today. MrMaple.com, Mr. Maple Info, then Mr. Maple Files, filter by Area 51 Mr. Maple Collection. So we've talked a little bit about how we got into this in our last podcast. We'll do a deep dive on that. But Tim and I, we love doing cutting edge plants. We're really suckers for what's new and interesting. We also love bringing back things that have disappeared. But today we're going to be talking about how we evaluate plants, kind of a little bit about what we're looking for when we do that. We'll talk specifically about some of our own introductions here, but just give you a little insight into the Area 51 process. And we call it Area 51 kind of as a joke. Like it is our top secret stuff we're working on. We let a lot of that stuff out there early, though. A lot of people hear about our Area 51. That's why everybody's bugging me for red panda and kryptonite and things that are still in works, because we joke about it being hidden, but we love to talk about the stuff with you guys. And so it's something we love to bring out and display some of the things we're working on. And, once something's already reached a cultivar status, we kind of learned this from Talon Buchholz a little bit. Talon, he puts a name on that cultivar. And it's funny how your mind associates with things. I know early on when Tim and I, we were just Nichols Nursery and we were evaluating seedlings, and it didn't take long at all till that number system got way out of control. We got up to Nichols Nursery evaluation, 2007, and we're like, gosh, man, this is getting a little crazy here. And then the mind to associate what that was with the plant was impossible. So, and then if it got out there accidentally, then you had cultivar 20007. I mean, what's that? And so it gets renamed inevitably. So we went with the Talon Buchholz method, and I like this method of actually assigning a cultivar name to a plant, even in evaluation. Now, it might not make it to fruition, so everything that's got a cultivar name might not become a full cultivar status. But with something like koi, I know exactly what that is. When you say Acer palmatum koi, that's how my mind works. I'm like, I know what that is. And so I can get to it immediately, and it kind of defines those traits for us. So it locks it in a little bit better.
Now, some of these plants that we have on the MrMaple introductions for Area 51 collection, maybe ones that we got to name that other people found, brought to us, and we had the honor and privilege of getting to put names on as well. And some of those that kind of got to be ones that were very special to our nursery, we threw in here in the Area 51 collection, because there's some amazing plants in here that are just super unique. And many of them we found, and plenty of them too, like we'll be talking about with some of these first olive randums, were found in other locations.
Right.
And then we got the honor to be able to put a name on it.
So we claim it as part of our collection if we put the name on it. If we developed that name, if we evaluated it here, it's something that we've actually put the marketing name on. It's got its, if it's final cultivar name from us, and it may be something that somebody sent to us and said, hey, think about grafting this one. It's a broom. It's interesting. And it didn't make it into the trade. And we said, look, this is how we're going to do this one and evaluate it. Now, one thing I always talk about when we do this, we talked a little bit about it in our last podcast, but when we're evaluating something, we like to name the 5 things closest to it. So if we're going to put a new cultivar out there, we don't need Hot Blonde Part 2. What we need is something that's interesting and different. So if we're going to name a cultivar that's like our Acer Olivierum X Hot Blonde, we're going to name the 5 closest things to that. How is it unique or different than those things? And then we're typically going to do the 5 and 7 method, which where we name the 5 closest things to it and then evaluate it for 7 years. So that's typically our general rule of thumb. If something's coming from a nurseryman, and we already know it's been evaluated a little while, that might speed up the process and expedite it if we kind of already know what it does. Then what we actually like to do is send that plant around to different places. So I like to get one to somebody in New Jersey, in Texas, in Seattle, in different environments, even within the South. And then we can kind of take notes. So those people can grow that tree. We can get it grafted. We can look at how it's changed it from graft. Often grafting a plant may put a lot of vigor into it that wasn't in the original seedling. It may change the characteristics of it a good bit. So one of the first stages we're going to do in that evaluation process is get it grafted and put a working name on it, and then try to experiment with it, see what it's doing.
So we're going down with the alphabetical order. One of the very first ones we're going to talk about is a tree, Acer Olivierum Hot Blonde.
So I love this plant. It's one we talk about a lot here in our nursery. It's one we grow a lot. We've never patented a plant at MrMaple, but we were really close with this one. This one was one we really debated patenting this. I've had some interest on patenting it in Europe. Excellent plant. Now, this is an Acer Olivierum X. So this is actually a Chinese maple hybrid with a Japanese maple. We believe possibly a hybrid between Olivierum and Acer Shirasawanum aureum, creating this bright golden yellow Acer Olivierum. Now, this is one of the best plants we'll probably ever name. So we're starting out here with one of our biggest hits. I joke about Japanese maple cultivars being like number ones for a musician. This is probably our biggest hit to date. This is our swan song right here. This is kind of it right here. But there's a lot of other good ones in here too.
I remember collecting the seed at this from the Keith Arboretum in Chapel Hill We collected off an Acer oliveranum, and lo and behold, when it came out, I believe Matt was actually the one who spotted this and was like, "That's a yellow. We got to watch that more."
Yeah, we actually ended up picking up about 15 of those seedlings and putting them in a small area in 1 gallons, and then kind of just watching them. The one that actually became Hot Blonde, we kind of tagged them as our numbering system. So we put different names on a whole set of them, and then we kind of flagged our favorite. So then the number one became the number one best one the whole time, and that's what eventually became Hot Blonde. We watched those seedlings for several years until they were in 7 gallons. Several of those that made the final cut got into the ground, into trials and evaluations, and they got grafted and sent different places. And that Hot Blonde just stood out from the rest of the mix. Every time it had that border to it, it had something that made it, exceed the other sister seedlings in its grouping. That they all were nice, but only one made the cut.
And I think this is really neat. I mean, we've got a whole YouTube video on the Heat Seeker series where we go in and talk about all the Acer oliveranums that we've introduced and all how awesome it is that they're super heat tolerant. But Matt brought up a really good point the other day when we were discussing this. Everyone talks about Acer pseudosubuldianum hybrids making things more cold tolerant. Well, this is an Acer oliveranum that is hybridized with the Japanese maple. Now, whether it's a palmatum or a shirasawanum, we think it's probably shirasawanum RM because that's the only yellow that was at the Keith Arboretum. But it is a hybrid with the Japanese maple. And that is going to make this thing more cold tolerant than your typical Acer oliveranum. Oliveranums, variety oliveranum, zone 6 through 9 typically.
Right.
But because it has that palmatum or shirasawanum influence in there, that is going to make it more cold tolerant. And we're claiming right now zone 6 through 9 with Hot Blonde.
We know several customers within Zone 5.
Yeah, Zone 5, we may be updating a lot of these in the Area 51 collection to further zones, especially these hybrids, as they're trialed more and grown more.
Our Zone 5 trials on this have been excellent. Most people within Zone 5 have had really good success. We want to go a few more winners to confirm that with this one, but it's been a winner for us. Typically Zones 5 through 9. Now we do, like Tim said, list it 6 through 9. One thing I like to mention there, too, is I think Acer oliveranum often gets a little mixed up with Acer oliveranum subspecies Formosanum. So some people get a little confused because the Formosanum doesn't quite go to as many cold zones. Sometimes we'll even list that one 7 through 9. This one, gosh, I've seen some awesome Acer oliveranums in very cold zone 5s and zone 6s. So the Acer oliveranum subspecies oliveranum, I think they're super durable. And again, this one being an ex-palmatum from the subspecies oliveranum, I think it's a good plant.
Now, we started out with the name Hot Blonde, but then switched to the name Golden Ticket.
Right. I believe it was Tom Rainey that messaged us and said that he had a plant already named Golden Ticket. We'd started to promote it, that we were going to have it available at an open house for the first time. It's one of our very early open houses. And I don't remember if it was him or another person that does some introductions, but had messaged us and said, "Hey, I actually have a plant patent under the name Golden Ticket." And I said, "Hey, it was meant to be." So I jokingly switched this one back to Hot Blonde. I always tell my wife I get some extra credit for naming a plant after her with Acer oliveranum Hot Blonde. Love this plant, though. That was our original name on it, and really the name I like the most. I think it's been really well received. It's become the jump-off point for our whole Heat Seeker series. So we've made a whole series out of that, and that's a trademark for MrMaple, that Heat Seeker series. But it's a unique way. We don't actually trademark or patent plants, but we do sometimes our series, so they can be kind of our special thing here. And that Hot Blonde is the very first one that kind of became popular in that Heat Seeker series.
Now, the thing about Hot Blonde that makes it so great is as that summer approaches and gets hotter, Hot Blonde gets more blonde and blonde yellow. And the fall color is outstanding. I mean, the fall color on it is a bright orange red.
Right.
I know we sent one of these to Talon Buchholz, and he was sending us photos back saying, "Check out the fall color on this thing."
You feel cool when your heroes grow your trees, right? And so I would say that was a lot of validation for some of us and our evaluation process here, that Talon, he saw this very early on, and he was like, "Guys, you got a winner here." Like, he was very complimentary of this one very early on. I could tell because he wanted one so he could grow it and graft it. And so he was really into this one. And it was just cool to see, the guy that named the Ghost series and so many prominent plants like Mayday and Japanese Princess. He wanted to grow Hot Blonde. He wanted to get it into the production for himself. And one of the things that's been really cool about it is it's kind of a nurtureman's dream. It's a very fast-growing plant. Like, if we took our 1 gallons and potted them up, by fall, they're busting 3 gallons. Like, it is a very vigorous plant.
This is one of our best introductions. So we're talking a little bit about blonde. We'll probably have to shorten it up a little bit to get all these others in 45 minutes. But there's some other great olive randums we have introduced or that we're working on introducing. I know Hot Chicken is one that...
Right. Jody kind of put this name on it as a joke. There's already a Hot Wings, so we didn't want to go with Hot Wings. This is an Acer Olivieranum X Palmatum that we collected at World Maple Park. So we were actually visiting Yano-san there in World Maple Park. And there's an Acer Olivieranum there that he's collected some hybrids off of as well. And those became Nakaharabini A and Nakaharabini B. So Yano-san had collected those, and he said those weren't really cultivar names. He said, guys, that's not really something that should go out there that way. That's just a working name. So he was going with that working name method there too. He said, if you want to put those in the trade, I recommend you putting a name on them. And so that became Hot Sauce and Hot Tamale. Now, the Hot Chicken, from that same lineage. We got that off the exact same tree that the Yano-san collected the original Hot Tamale and Hot Sauce from. We were blown away that Hot Chicken had that a little more Leonard Lobelum style foliage to it. It's almost like more Hagoromo style, I should say.
Like sessilifolium structure. I mean, it just looks like little hands out there and almost wings. And that's where we like that name Hot Chicken, because you get that heat seeker series with the hot, and then that sort of feather-like structure with the chicken.
Yeah, not Leonard Lobelum, but more sessilifolium, like Tim was saying. It's got that Hagoromo, that Koshimino-esque type growth to it. If you're familiar with any of those styles, that Hagoromo style, it's a really unique, it can almost be its whole category of leaf shape. I mean, we put it in Matsumure, but it's a very unique style foliage. And we were excited to find some variances there with Acer Olivieranum X. I mean, this one clearly came from Acer Olivieranum. It leaves out kind of a bronzy pink green, fades to a bright, kind of a little bit more of an olive, I would actually say, green. And then some great shades of red and orange in the fall, but really unique there. I think it's going to be a fun addition to that Heat Seeker series with the Hot Blonde, the Hot Chicken, the Hot Tamale, and the Hot Sauce. And there's more to come there, too. You can check out our whole video we did on YouTube about the Heat Seeker series, but I wanted to breeze through those a little bit because while we didn't actually evaluate the Hot Tamale and the Hot Sauce, we did name those here at our nursery. So I was kind of proud. I was honored that Yano asked us to put a name on them, and we sent our names to him, and he said, I love it.
So next up, we've got Acer Palmatum Blackbeard's Gold. I mean, I love this plant. This is one of my favorites from the Area 51 collection. This is an old seedling that Dad planted out in the 1980s in his garden. Now, Dad used to go out and put Japanese maples in rows, Japanese maple seedlings in rows. And he would dig those up and take them to the local flea market for sale. And this is one of those seedlings that never made it to sale, ended up being a plant in a row that he just enjoyed in the garden and left to enjoy at his house. But it's a red Matsumuri style that goes to a brilliant yellow. And everybody with some yellows and some oranges. Right. Everyone always said, I want that cultivar when they came looking at all of our cultivars in the gardens at MrMaple. And
yeah, it just got talked about so much. People would originally visit the nursery, which was behind my parents' home originally, and it was a tree that people walked by and asked for by name. And there's only so many times people can walk by a tree and say, hey, I want to purchase this, before as a nurseryman you go, I better start grafting that.
And I think in the early stages, Matt and I were like, oh, that's just a tree that Dad has that's a seedling. It's not a grafted specimen. And then we realized that this tree had better qualities than some of the other grafted specimens, and really put on some amazing yellow-orange fall color. And being from North Carolina, Blackbeard. I mean, Blackbeard's known for scavenging our coast, and Blackbeard's Gold. I mean, I thought the name was fitting. I think Matt came up with the name on this one.
Yeah, it's a fun one in that it's also a very dark midsummer. It leaves out more maroon, but this one could get almost black. So it gets a very dark shade to it in the summer, kind of a pinkish new growth sometimes, but then fading, and that fall color being that amazing golden yellow. It just gave us something during each season that piqued our interest. And because of its unique leaf shape and color, it was a no-brainer to start grafting it and get it into the trade.
Now, next up, we've got Acer Palmatum Cupid.
Okay, so this is one Tim found for sure. And the name Cupid actually originates because we collected the soundwood around Valentine's Day. And I think that's where we were thinking the Cupid. This is a broom on Sangukaku. So this is a broom Tim found. We were actually traveling to go eat some dinner. We were going kind of far away for us for a regular nursery day, but we were down and we were going to a pizza place. And Tim said, "I think I saw a broom in that tree."
And I always, when it's winter or when it's fall, I'm accused of not looking at the road and I'm looking at the trees as
Not
we're going.
accused, dude. He isn't looking at his phone. He's looking at the trees.
So, I might not be texting and driving, but I might be looking at witches' brooms and driving, which is probably just as dangerous. But in the Sengukaku was this coral bark Japanese maple was a witch's broom, and the fall color was. It was later when we looked at the fall color, but the plant was just had this amazing dense.
Yeah, we
dense
went by it
habit.
several times before grafting it. We went by once in the fall, and one thing that was kind of unique that Tim started on there is that the broom in the tree went to fall color before the rest of the plant. So you could see that it was a lush green, but this broom was almost starting to get a little bit more of that golden tint to it. And we said it really made it stand out to us even more that this was something different.
Exactly.
And this had mutated into a new broom there. And so then we actually went back and collected the soundwood, I believe, on Valentine's Day. And that's where we came up with the Cupid. We didn't even have a working name. We said, hey, it's Valentine's Day.
Red
How
bark.
about a Cupid, right?
It's perfect for the red bark and the fact that we were collecting the signwood during that. But it was so interesting, I thought, with that fall color changing on the witch's broom before the rest. And it just grabbed my attention and grabbed Matt's attention. We pulled over, got permission to get cuttings later. And it's more of a dwarf coral bark selection. I mean, it still has that red bark, that everything you love about a Sengukaku, but is on a denser dwarf habit.
And much more durable than Flagellum. It's a good plant for a broom on a coral bark. It's got the durability. Again, this one's more 6 through 9, but excellent plant and one we try to offer. Anything in our Area 51, if you're actually looking at it, a lot of things are sold out, and that's because they do sell out pretty quickly when we relist them.
So next up is one that Matt and I hold dear to our heart. It's Acer palmatum Dolly Hill.
Yeah, now we actually named this one kind of by mistake, but we're glad we did. So the story behind this one is my grandmother is Dolly Hill, and she started growing Japanese maples in the 1950s, and she loved planting and horticulture. That was her passion. Tim and I grew up gardening in my grandma's garden, and it's really where we get our love of gardening from. Independently of that, this is my mother's mother. Independently of that, my dad started growing Japanese maples in the 1970s, so we get it from both sides of our family, pretty honest. Now, Dolly Hill, awesome lady. She was just a strong, fun, charismatic lady. I actually live in the house that her and my grandfather Hicks built. And in their front yard was this Japanese maple that she'd planted in the 1950s. And people would pull up in the yard and ask her, hey, I'll give you like 10 grand for that tree, which is a lot of money, especially in the late 80s and early 90s for my grandmother. And she would say, no, I love my tree too much. You're not taking my tree. And so this tree, eventually we decided, it was probably after we bought Highland Creek Nursery and we were starting to grow our business that way a little bit. And we had cultivar list. And so we were grafting Dolly Hill for family members because we were going to be giving it out to family members as this is grandma's tree. And everybody just loves this tree. So anybody in our family knows instantly what the Dolly Hill Japanese maple was.
And then that tree's name made it to our availability list. And then people started ordering it, and wanting more and more of it. And it's a unique red upright in the fact that the lobes on the leaf are very wavy. So the lobe furthest to the left will be high, and then the next lobe next to it will be lower. And then the next lobe up to it will be high, and the next lobe will be lower. So on a mature leaf, it has a very wave-like appearance, which is very unusual and different.
Yeah.
But it was also just something that was just really beautiful being a red upright Japanese maple.
Excellent upright tree. I'm really glad we got it grafted. Tragically, later there was a car accident. Somebody was playing around the road. Somebody swerved to miss them and hit a poplar tree. Well, then that poplar tree fell and damaged the original Dolly Hill plant there in our garden. It was heartbreaking to take it down because it was a tree planted in the 1950s. But I eventually said, hey, my grandmother wouldn't want to look at it if it wasn't too pretty either. We'll plant a better one back. We've got it grafted. So we did lose this 35-year-old specimen, 35-foot specimen from the 1950s that was probably 35 feet by probably 35 feet wide at this stage. Gorgeous plant. But we do have this one preserved, and it's one that holds a special place in our heart, being from my grandmother, Dolly Hill. So actually, next up, we have Dragon Master. So Dragon Master, another one of those home run hitters. That one with Hot Blonde, maybe some of our best ones we've ever done. There was a huge batch of things that went through to pick the Dragon Master. I've mentioned in some of the other things we do that there was a whole grouping of kind of orangey to yellow style weeping Ryusin form Japanese maples that we were going through that had that similar form to a Ryusin. Dragon Master was the premium best of the bunch. I think some of the other ones that didn't make the cut were like Yellow Submarine,
Shooting Stars.
Yeah, there were a few that were in that mix that almost made it, but the Dragon Master just was the best of the bunch. And this is another one that could be in contention for the best cultivar we'll ever name. It is a weeping Ryusin style Japanese maple with bright golden foliage. It has very large foliage as well. I would describe the general makeup of the tree as like a Ryusin X Orange Dream for the color.
Yeah, and because of that, I'd give it some protection from the hot afternoon sun. It's everything you love about a Ryusin, but can really give you some really nice shades of yellow. And yellow does so much in the landscape and garden and really brings out so many colors, from being good contrast against dark reds to making you see every shade of green out there in the landscape. That yellow is so useful, especially on a weeping, smaller plant that you can train and shape and do so much with.
So next up here in the MrMaple Area 51 introductions, we've got Acer palmatum dissectum, the tiger.
It's the thrill of the fight, right? Acer palmatum, the tiger, was found as a chance seedling off of Tiger Rose. And Matt and I were sitting down grafting, and we were listening
to classic rock.
And, you know, Eye of the Tiger was such a fitting name.
Dun, 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 dun. So it became the Eye of the Tiger. This is a fun lace leaf. We like this one a lot. It's just got a lot of unique characteristics to it. It's got some really good spring color and a really good low spreading habit.
Yeah, really good low spreading habit. Some really good fall colors too. Some really nice yellows and oranges in the fall with some nice, more like a picked up red with chartreuse eye to it on the lace leaf itself in the springtime. It's a lace leaf that is unusual and different and definitely stood out from the crowd. And after some years of evaluation, it made it into the Area 51 collection.
Yeah, it was a fan favorite of ours. It's always been popular here in person. It's one people are starting to learn, I think, but it's one that's always been more popular when people see it in person here. So moving quite along, we've got another home run hitter here. That's Acer palmatum Firefly.
Now, we had actually brought some plants in labeled Acer palmatum Moonfire. And if you've seen our Dick Wolf collection, the Red Maple Nurseries collections, the part 1 and part 2, and all of that deep dive we did into Red Maple Nurseries, you know that Moonfire is a red upright that was found by Richard Wolf and introduced into the nursery trade. Well, these Moonfires didn't look anything like Moonfires, and eventually I ended up calling up the supplier and saying, hey, what in the world is going on here?
Yeah, we kind of did this one by reverse. So we looked at the plant, and I actually remember calling Tim over, and I'm like, I don't think this is Moonfire, but this is nuts. We were looking at them late summer. The new growth flushes were just incredible. And so, not planning to introduce it, Tim and I said, what could this be? This isn't right. So we named the top 5 closest things to it, trying to figure out what it was. It's like, well, here's our guest list. And we grew this tree for a few years. So we didn't make it available because we didn't have the correct name on it. And we said, well, it's definitely not Moonfire. And then we're talking with the nurseryman that had it. He said, well, the guy never really introduced it. He just sold it to me, and we were kind of selling it under this name Moonfire, but he didn't know there was another Moonfire in existence. So
this was a chance seedling that had been found by this other guy and introduced as Moonfire after Moonfire was already a name on a popular Japanese maple.
And so the guy said, look, if you're really interested in it, why don't you evaluate it, put a name on it if you think it's worth naming, and put it out there under that name. Let me know, and I'll change the name. So Firefly, we kind of named in reverse here because we'd already evaluated the top 5 things to it. And
we were trying to figure out what it was. So we'd set all these different plants next to it trying to evaluate it. And then contacted the supplier like, hey,
this isn't this.
We thought this was something that was mislabeled at your nursery. But then when we got it and evaluated it, it wasn't any of those. And he's like, yeah, it wasn't. It was a chance seedling found by one of my friends.
And the funniest part about all that is we just kept getting more excited about it. The more we looked at this thing in every season to try to figure out what it was, it just looked like nothing else. So we would look at it in the spring and we'd take notes and we'd be like, there's nothing that looks like this. This is crazy looking. It's probably one of my very favorite reticulated plants. I mean, maybe my all-time favorite reticulated plant. It's got some just amazing shades. It goes through so many different interesting stages, from apricots to purples to just fading borders to it. Late summer, it's a fiery red. It just goes through so much. It stood out to us in every single season, and maybe that's why we paid so much attention to it, was to try to figure out what it was initially. But it really made us stop and go, nothing looks like this in every single season. And so eventually we put the name Firefly on it as a working name. We'd already evaluated it for 5 years by this point. So we said, hey, this thing is awesome. Let's go ahead and get this out here into the trade. And now that's what's become known as Acer Palmatum Firefly. So that was the cultivar we introduced that we kind of backed into. We really didn't plan on introducing that one, but it fell in our lap and it made too much sense. And it was all honestly just too cool looking to ignore it. It just kept getting my attention.
So next up, we've got something from our Pendulous Treasures collection. Acer Palmatum Fountain of Youth. Now, we've got a whole YouTube video just on that, so you can go check out our Pendulous Treasures collection, where we discuss a lot of the weeping selections that we've introduced. But the thing I liked about Fountain of Youth was that hand-like, almost Matsumuri-style leaf, which is unlike any of the other styles that have that weeping, heavily shape, that typically have more of that palmatum-like leaf like Ryusin.
Right. I think this one almost confuses people. It's getting more popular and more popular the more it gets out there. I know other nurseries grabbed this one up right away because everybody could tell how special it was. Whenever we listed this one, a lot of other nurseries were like, get me this, because it's really unique. Each leaf has that elongated, almost heavily Matsumuri style foliage, and it leaves out kind of a salmon color in the early spring, fading to a light green, and then there's reds, yellows, and oranges in it in the fall. It is a really unique plant that is heavily pendulous. I think what the confusion comes in is some people feel like it's almost a lace leaf, and so they don't understand that it has such a Ryusin-like shape to it. It has that extremely, extremely cascading habit. This one gets about as big as you stake it. So like Dragon Master, I like to stake it up to about 5 to 6 feet and then let it weep down from there.
Now, many of y'all may say, where did these names come from? Firefly, Fountain of Youth. They're so great. Well, often years ago when Matt and I would travel to these garden shows, if we're driving to Nashville, that's a 6 hour drive sometimes. And we would make lists of great plant names and wait till we actually found the plant that matched up.
Right.
And so Firefly was one of those things where that came from one of those plant lists. Fountain of Youth, that's another one that came from the plant list. And who doesn't want a Fountain of Youth in their garden?
Right.
I mean,
that's the mythological Fountain of Youth that Ponce de Leon looked for. I mean, some of these were history. I'm a history major. Some of these are nerdy, like Blackbeard's Gold and Fountain of Youth. Some of them are just things that we liked or we found were kind of whimsical and goofy, or something that just kind of made us smile, like something that we associated with that specific plant, and it brought about, I think a good name enhances a good plant. Like my friend Mike Francis talked about what's in a name and how a bad name can kill a good plant, and it's really true. So we always look to enhance a good plant with a good name, and I think Fountain of Youth definitely did that.
I think you also led into the next one, Acer Palmatum Gold Digger.
Yeah, that's a great plant. Gold Digger is one that we actually, again, introduced here at our nursery that has some really unique golden yellow bark to it.
And we were doing a grafting class at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and one of the people in the class, Laddie Munger, said, hey, I've got this tree that I've found in my garden. It's got good yellow bark. You should come check it out. Well, we didn't get a chance to check it out on that trip, but he mailed us photos. And the funny thing is as Matt and I were going to probably go get cuttings from this plant on our first trip, we were listening to the song Gold Digger.
Uh-oh.
And so that's one of those whimsical names that just meant a lot to us at the time. Matched up pretty well with the yellow bark for this in the shade. And
again, another one Talon Buchholz loved.
Yeah.
We showed this to him and he was like, I got to get this. And he liked it immediately. So that affirmation from one of your mentors is always great. He was a big fan of it. I love this one when it leaves out in the early spring for its kind of pink new growth it has over top of that other foliage. So it kind of blushes a bright pink over top of the green in the spring, which is really unique as well.
And gives you some good fall colors of some yellows and oranges. But it's definitely a tree that if you give it some protection from the hot afternoon sun, or if you give it a deep shaded location, can really get you some of that light yellow color on the bark.
Now, if you're in MrMaple files, sometimes things will be down for editing if we're adding photos or working on the other side. One we actually just skipped over that I'll go back to is Ghost Dragon. That's another one in that Pendulous Treasures collection. Ghost Dragon was almost a joke of a name. It was like combining the two most ultimate things in Japanese maples, the Ghost series and a dragon. But it was a fun name for us that we came to bring about for this heavily just unique weeping form with a very unique leaf to it.
Yeah, that's another member from the Pendulous Treasures collection. And when we walked out and saw this plant that was a chance seedling, it had some veining in the leaf, which made us think of something like the Ghost series. But then it also had that weeping habit like Ryusen, and Ryu on Ryusen means dragon. And so we started saying, hey, we've got a ghost dragon.
Right.
And the more we watch this plant, the more we evaluate it. We evaluate it for a long time because not every year that reticulation is as strong as the others. But in the springtime, it really had some really nice deep purple red bark, not bark, deep purple red tipping to the leaves. And that really made it stand out and give it something a little bit extra.
We've had it fade to get almost like some Hikasiyama style variegation and some swirling. I know Alan Castile was very early on in getting one of these. He's one of the people we sent this to evaluate. Brian, we sent one to evaluate as well. So they were some of the first people with this. And you can start to get this like malting variegation within the plant as well, which is quite unique. Doesn't typically show up every single year, but we have had it be fairly consistent, especially in that late summer flush.
So next up, we've got Acer palmatum Jade Dragon. And this is the original member. This was the first MrMaple / Nichols Nursery is what we were originally known as.
Yeah, so this was a seedling my dad was grafting in the 90s from Robert Jackman. And the original name on this one was Roja Yatsubusa, or Rojabusa, I believe is how he had it. And it was Robert Jackman and then a combination of Yatsubusa, so it was like Rojabusa. And we told Mr. Jackman, we're like, hey, we really appreciate you getting this tree to our dad. It's really, really cool. But I think that name's super confusing because Roja in Spanish is red. And so it was very confusing to anybody to look at this jade dark green plant and go, Roja. No, that's not right.
And so the rumor has it is that he found this as a chance seedling underneath a Shishigashira Japanese maple here in Hendersonville. And it had that flatter leaves, real slow growing. And Dad was one of these people in the area that people knew for grafting Japanese maples. And he brought it to him and said, hey, I've got this seedling, let's put a name on it. And the original working name on it was Roja Yatsubusa, or Roja Yatsubusa, which we had to eventually talk to him and say, look,
right, we gotta fix this.
Roja Yatsubusa looks a lot like Roja Yatsubusa. And a lot of people will think that it's supposed to be red because Roja is Spanish and red, or Spanish for red.
So moving quite along here, we've got Japanese lanterns. Now, this was a fun plant we put a name on. This one we found, and it was a tree that a Hogyoku had actually been damaged by that 07 freeze. So the graft on that Hogyoku had died and left only the understock. Well, the understock had come up, so the original plant was still labeled Hogyoku. But what we were seeing looked like little lanterns all over this plant. Now it goes to a really bright, bold red to sometimes orange in the fall, and it just reminded us of Japanese lanterns. We loved it so much because it looked like lanterns along a line. Had such a unique habit to it. Each little leaf on that stem curled back under to create a perfect little lantern shape.
And it makes you just think about those lanterns out in the garden that people put out to really enjoy the garden.
Right.
And the way it curls down, especially when it turns into the fall color, really makes you think of Japanese lanterns.
So next up here, we've got another one that we had a working name for a while, and then we found just the perfect plant for it, and that's Acer palmatum koi. Now, koi is a unique Macawa Yatsubusa seedling. We love Macawa Yatsubusas. They're some of our favorite plants to look through for evaluations for future plants, and oftentimes what you'll get are these bronzed out colors. Now, just because it's a reoccurring seedling, the best one had to get named from that category. Now, we went through thousands of seedlings from Macawa Yatsubusa, and we've only selected about 3 ever for introduction. And koi stood out to us not only because of the color and leaf shape, late summer flushes, but also growth rate. It's a good grower, and it puts on a ton of nice interior flushes. It almost has a cartoon-like habit to it.
And with that bronze coloration that you get on koi, Matt and I did a lot of garden shows that weren't really garden shows. They were koi shows.
Right.
And those koi people were so into Japanese maples and really enjoyed it. And the bronze coloration and how this one goes through the different color changes made us think of how colorful kois are out there in the ponds. And because of that, we ended up putting the name Acer palmatum koi.
Yeah, it just kind of had that swirling effect to it. It kind of reminded me of a Showa. We've actually bought some books on Japanese koi. You can get really into that. Oh my gosh, there's shows where we have friends who are so into koi that the heritage and the bloodlines and all those things matter so much with koi, and they're interesting they're interesting fish to be growing. But we always knew we wanted to name a tree koi, and then when the right tree came along that just fit it perfectly, we're a huge fan of Macawi Etsubusa, if you haven't noticed. I mean, that's the Macawi Etsubusa family. We kind of coined that term family as Makawa and then a lot of its offspring. Koi is one that when we put it up, it sells out right away.
So next up, we have Acer palmatum Kristen Star. This was found by our good friends Bill and Kristen Taylor down in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And this was a chance seedling that he'd found and had been growing for a long time before we ever grafted it. I mean, when we got to evaluate this, we were able to go out and see a specimen that was already 15, 20 years old already.
Yeah, it was fun at open house because Bill and Kristen Taylor were here, and we're walking around. People were asking about Kristen Star, and I'm like, "Hey, Kristen's right over here, so why don't you ask her about it?" I just saw Kristen. Awesome plant. What this one really stood out for us for is that spring color is unrivaled. It honestly reminds me a little bit of Akane, but a more durable Acer palmatum Akane. Kristen Star can handle a little bit of sun, and it was doing really well in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It is a beautiful specimen plant. It really just leaves out this like neon orange with a yellow casting eye to it. It's a blaze of spring color. It's one of the most colorful spring Japanese maples I've ever seen. And so it's not one we necessarily put a name on, but it's one we kind of popularized here in the trade, getting it from a collector and getting it out there to the nursery industry.
It's probably one of the ones that sells out the quickest of everyone in the Area 51 collection.
Oh wow! When it hits, it hits. That one's one that I think people have made it more popular by sharing some pictures of it online, so people kind of know what to expect. The hype machine has went into full effect on that one, and whenever it's out there, it's gone. So next up is another one that I'd say the hype machine goes pretty heavy after. This is Acer palmatum Kryptonite. Now this is another Macawi Etsubusa variegated form that we helped put a name on. But it was actually a sport found by our good friend Keith Johansson. So Keith Johansson found this one in Dallas, Texas. We were down there visiting Keith, and he got us some signwood from this original sport off of a Macawi Etsubusa there in his display garden. Now, the original sport actually died, but we were lucky enough to get grafts from that sport before it did and retain those traits. I was so excited over this one. I said it made me a little weak in the knees, and Superman, he gets weak in the knees from the kryptonite. So this was as a Japanese maple collector, this was my kryptonite right there.
And I like this one because it's almost like a Manino Sato style variegation with a Makawa-like habit. I mean, that combination of the two things going on is just unusual, especially the Manino Sato on that green on lime green variegation when it goes to that. Super special, very unique, and is a really defined variegation at that.
Oh, it's a really cool plant. Now, one of my next ones I'll talk about is Acer palmatum Looking Glass Falls. Now, this is another one from that Pendulous Treasures collection, which is a MrMaple trademark. We have a little collection there. Think of it almost like the Ghost series. Looking Glass Falls is a Ryusen-style Japanese maple with a bright purple border in the early spring. So it's going to have a border more reminiscent of like Acer palmatum Kiyohime in the early spring. It does fade a little faster than Kiyohime, but it's one of the very best variations of Ryusen we've ever seen yet. It has that Ryusen style, but a really unique border to it. Now, several of these we describe as a Ryusen style may actually be F2s from Jiro Shidari or from that Nakakomoto Weeping lineage, but they have a very Ryusen style shape.
So next up, we've got Acer palmatum Pink Princess. This is actually a witch's broom that happened at Munn's Nursery.
Yeah.
And Carl is a good friend of ours, and he mailed us cuttings off of it and said, "Hey guys, this really fits in your collector type growth. Why don't y'all graft this and evaluate this?"
So I was early on. I knew I was having a daughter, and I really liked the name Princess because my daughter likes everything princess. And so my first daughter, Carolina, there, Pink Princess may have come about as a result of that. This was a broom off my mother's favorite plant, Beni Shishihenga, meaning red and changeful. So a very colorful, bright pink on green already. Carl, who introduced Moonrise and so many other great plants, found this one, and he said, "Guys, get this grafted. Let me know what you think." So we got to evaluate it there. And he said, if you really like this one, go ahead and put a name on it. So we kind of co-introduced this one with Carl Munn, as Carl actually found the plant, but we did name it here at our nursery and had a lot of fun doing that.
And I think this fit more of our style of super collector plants.
It's pretty niche.
It's pretty niche as being a witch's broom on a variegated plant, which is pretty unusual. I mean, you don't find many witch's brooms on variegated plants, but this was one that really fit, and a lot of people will like growing this in containers and smaller places because it has that denser compact habit.
It's a pretty rare thing. We were at a plant conference a couple years ago, and Barry Hinger was asking who can think of a variegated witch's broom. So it not only is a mutation for variegation, but also a mutation for broom. A very rare thing to find amongst any plants. I actually thought of 3, but it's a very rare thing to find. And I said, well, look, I have one I'm actually evaluating in our nursery right now. This is Pink Princess. It's a variegated Benishishihinga. Thought of Peve Maribo, and then also Sherman's Nordlich. So those are all kind of, you let us know if you could think of any other variegated brooms, but it's very rare for a plant to be a broom and also variegated.
So next up, we've got Acer palmatum red jaguar. Now, the original name on this one was Acer palmatum Jason's variegated. And that was a working name. This was found by one of our good friends, Jason Stevens, as a chance seedling. And he's found a lot of really good introductions. Like he found wildfire and a bunch of other plants. But we were able to talk him into putting the name red jaguar on this one because it really gave this something extra on the way, this red with white, almost spider-like variegation.
Right.
I mean, it's so unusual in the variegation on red jaguar.
Totally his introduction, but we did get to contribute there with that name, so we kind of included a little bit in our listing too. Really unique in that it leaves out in the early spring, and in the early spring, it kind of looks like a blood good. Like you see that dark maroon, but then as the summer comes on, even early in the spring, you start to see these little lightning bolts forming across the plant, and then you get to this stage where it is just splashes of ukigumo-like color on a red Japanese maple. It's really wild. There's really not much else like it. Very unique tree, red jaguar.
Now, you know we say that we like those Makawi Yatabusa types. Next is the myth, the legend, red panda. Now, we're working to try to make this tree available. We haven't released it yet, but this is the Japanese maple with red color, Makawi Yatabusa-like habit, but holds that red color longest throughout the season on any of the Japanese maple cultivars we have of red Makawa types or seedlings we've evaluated.
Now, if you look at this one in June and July, it's going to be more green with splashes of red over it. So full disclosure, it's not going to stay red every single season like an Emperor One, but this has been the very best Makawi Yatabusa red that we've ever seen. Now, we've evaluated several from other nurseries, from other collectors. Here at our nursery, red panda has been paramount amongst those. It has been a Makawi Yatabusa with a very unique leaf. It has that little bit more dissected leaf. It's almost a little bit more fingered out. It's elongated lobes on this one, but the colors have just been immaculate.
We did a video in the winter on when should I upsize my Japanese maple to what size pot. And when we just brought a liner of red panda and mentioned it for a second.
Create a little bit of hysteria.
We created a hysteria of people begging for red panda, that they wanted the red panda. They wanted the red panda. And I'm sure this is going to increase a little bit more now too, since it's not just one random video out of all of the videos we released during the winter. I mean, you couldn't even see the photos of the plant at the time.
We did throw up a couple photos of here's what it does in the spring.
But hearing about it now and getting it out there more, it's going to become even more popular.
Yeah, now with any of these guys, we're always working to get them available, especially if they're in our Area 51 collection. They're always coming back. It's something we're always working to propagate and get more of here at our nursery. To be clear with you, some of these take a long time to get, especially if it's a Makawi Yatabusa type. It's going to take a while to get a lot of signs, so it does take us a little bit of time to build those up.
So next up, we've got Acer palmatum Shazam.
Yeah, now Shazam is an introduction that we actually evaluated here at our nursery and put a name on. This is a seedling that was in Bobby Green, one of his gardens, and he sent us a cutting off this because it had huge foliage to it.
Now, whenever I hear Shazam, I think a little bit.
You're more Gomer Pyle.
Yeah,
I'm thinking more of the superhero.
But that's exactly the point. This was named. We put the name after it because this has regular size red upright leaves, but also can get some really, really large leaves as well. And since it's got regular size and really large leaves, it made us think of the superhero that says Shazam as a little boy and then turns into a superhero.
Very unique. It can rival many of your Acer japonicums for largeness of leaf. You'll actually get some smaller foliage in there as well. But after grafting this one and growing it for 5 to 7 years, we were blown away that in 7 gallons you had some japonicum style foliage, and it's replicated that in the ground too. As we've continued to grow this one, some foliage is just massive in size on the plant, making it very unique amongst upright reds.
Now, next up we've got Strawberry Fields. This was a seedling found by Jonathan Savage, and Jonathan Savage is the guy who introduced Lillian's Jewel. Lillian's Jewel is named after his daughter. And Jonathan sent us Strawberry Fields as sort of a trade for some other cultivars that he wanted. But he was like, "This plant's pretty cool. You should introduce this."
Yeah, it's a really unique plant. Heavily reticulated variegation to this one. I like it that it's almost elmwood-like in its older growth, but you get that intense pink spring color, that strawberry pink over top of that, and good Beatles name there with the strawberry spring. I mean, who doesn't like a classic rock name plant? There's several that actually aren't even on our website, like Cashmere. We'll talk about later. Maybe we'll have to do an Area 51 update because we do name a lot of plants with classic rock names. Moving along here, we have Acer palmatum watermelon. Now, this is a lace leaf that's going to be green in the summer. But what blew us away about this one is that kind of watermelon pink on green coloration it has.
Now, in the springtime, some of the new growth can have a little bit of pink color to it, but it really has a lot of pink petioles when it's first leafing out with that green color. Now, this was a unique thing in the fact that all of Dad's seedlings that he planted in the 1980s, we mentioned earlier, throw off tons and tons of seedlings. And we would go through that and evaluate hundreds and hundreds of lace leaf Japanese maples that came off of them. Mm-hmm. Now, we would go through probably, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds to find the lace leaves because upright Matsumurris can throw lace leaf Japanese maples. And this was in our very first evaluation process of trying to understand, hey, where did these lace leaves come from, lace leaf seedlings, and then what makes them special and unique. And we went through probably, I think they were listed up to like 280.
Oh gosh, it was a lot.
Lace leaf seedlings. And
we kept coming back to this one.
And watermelon was the very best of them. It really showed good vigor, even on its own roots. It had some good colors to it, and it was not your typical bronze like many of the others were.
Right. Really cool plant, one we continue to offer to this day, but one that's probably been around in our nursery for, over 10 years now for sure. Now, next up we have a very unique one that's Acer pubipalmatum. So it's a whole other species there in section palmata. These are grafted onto palmatum. Flying daggers. Now, we may have to start getting this one available again. Spend a minute on this one.
Yeah, this is one that I loved a bunch. It was actually probably collected at seed the same time we collected Hot Blonde.
That's a good chance.
It came from the Keith Arboretum, and Mr. Keith told us, "Hey, Tim, there's no reason to collect seed on that Acer pubipalmatum. I've collected on it before, and nothing's ever came up." And I said, "Well, do you care if I collect anyways and try it out?" And Acer pubipalmatum Flying Daggers had a almost lunar lobum style to Acer pubipalmatum. And pubipalmatum has some electric fall colors of bright fiery reds. Amazing plant. Great plant out there in the landscape as the straight species. But this was a cultivar selection that has a very unique leaf for Acer pubipalmatum.
So last up, but certainly not least, we've got one everybody likes to talk about. Brian said it was the most important question in our first podcast, and that's Acer shirasawatum Magic Moon. Now, this is a super unique Acer shirasawatum, so it's got that full moon style foliage, but with some interesting swirling variegation. It's got a swirly, unique variegation in there that kind of gives it a magical appearance over top of that full moon style foliage.
I thought it was magical just because it was a variegated Acer shirasawatum. I mean, that's pretty special all by itself. That doesn't happen often. And this was a chance seedling that we also got in that trade. It was a pretty good trade with Jonathan Savage when we got Strawberry Fields and Magic Moon, both as two plants that we got to introduce at the same time. And these plants are just amazing.
Yeah, I was talking to Jonathan and we were exchanging stuff, and we would send him some of our evaluations and vice versa. And he said, "I don't think I'm going to do anything with this one, but I really like it. You should probably name it." And he sent me the original Magic Moon seedling. And I was just so thrilled. I actually remember I was sitting in a farmer's market in Florence, South Carolina when I got the picture of this. And I'm like, dude, that needs to get named. And so really cool plant, Magic Moon, very unique style variegation to it. I think it's one that's unique and different and outside the box for Acer shirasawatum, so it's something that's always highly sought after. I did learn my lesson. I sent Brian Rule one of these too early on when he was in Oklahoma, and so I didn't have enough to keep grafting from. I got a little too happy when I let go of it too quick. I had probably 15 to 20 3 gallons, and I decided I was going to keep 2 of those and sell everything else off. And I should have kept the entire set because we'd have had it like 5 times over by now. But what we ended up doing was, having to retrace our steps a little bit and build numbers again in this one before the next re-release. So as always with any of these, we're working to get them back in stock, but sometimes it's a little bit longer of a process.
And this isn't everything that's in our Area 51 collection. Our Area 51 collection includes a lot of our evaluations. And we've got some other ones that we've even introduced, like Acer Bajurianum Golden Pharaoh, that haven't made it to the new website yet.
Right. Or something like Cashmere. I know Brian's been making that one popular online too. Another classic rock name. We're always evaluating and looking for new things. So it's an ever-changing mix here on our Area 51 collection. There'll always be new things getting added to this collection. I think it's a pretty well-rounded collection, though. I'm a big fan of this. I would put it up against a lot of Japanese maple collections as pretty good ones. There's some home run hitters in this set, I feel like. We try not to name something unless we're really, really keen on it. And Tim and I are our biggest critics. So if it's something that's in the Area 51 collection, we've argued why for or why against it. And it's came out on top after our rigorous evaluation process. And we've decided, hey, this is worthy of cultivar status. This needs to be out there. Despite there being 2,000 named varieties of Japanese maples, this one is worth the cut. And it's something we're very proud of here at our nursery, to push that envelope forward and try to be a little bit more cutting edge with it, trying to do some things that add to what's already been out there.
You may have been watching this and listening to this podcast or watching this on YouTube and saying, man, that's a whole lot of different varieties of Japanese maples. What you're not seeing is all the plants that didn't make the cut.
Right. Thousands.
There's plenty that didn't make the cut that were a witch's broom that died off on us, that wasn't very hardy, like Carolina broom originally was. I mean, there's so many ones that we found and did, propagated
long evaluations on that turned into failures.
And we said,
these are just the hits.
Yeah, these are just the hits off of everything we've been evaluating for years and years. And we have 1,400 different varieties of Japanese maples to evaluate these against, to figure out how special each of these really are. And unless it stands out from the crowd, and unless it makes a statement by itself that's different from all the others, there's no reason to introduce it. Mm-hmm. And all these have been introduced because they really were unique and really different and special.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking through this, guys. This is a little bit of us sharing our passion for Japanese maples with you. And certainly the Area 51 is one of the things we're most passionate about here at our nursery. We love this evaluation process. We hope you've enjoyed this little bit of a deep dive where we discuss a little bit about each of the ones we currently have up on there of the Area 51 collection. And those are just trees that we've introduced or named here at MrMaple. We're a huge fan of Japanese maples, as you can't tell. So we love doing this talk show specifically about Japanese maples just to share that passion with you guys. And we're going to keep doing that. These are going to air every Sunday night at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel, so you can always watch a video accompaniment there. But we're going to keep dropping this on all those podcast platforms, so definitely subscribe to us if you listen to podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts, because as that sub rate goes up, we're going to be doing even more stuff. We've got some amazing interviews lined up. We've got some nurserymen you're going to want to hear from. We've got some the heart-burning questions for Japanese maples here we're going to be answering on the show. So stick around for that. There's going to be some really cool stuff to come.
I really want to get into some of these how-tos to really help some of the people who are just starting out with Japanese maples as well, but also dig into some of this really fun stuff and interview some of the people that we really want to interview on some really interesting topics, from people who've introduced tons of cool plants to people who might be really good at certain aspects of how-to with Japanese maples. Right.
I think there's so much that can be done here. Definitely appreciate you tuning in. This is going to be the kind of stuff that we want to watch, so we're going to keep creating that content, and hopefully there's an audience for it. We really appreciate you tuning in. And as always, you can check us out on MrMaple.com if you want to find some really amazing plants, or you want to sign up for one of our 10 at 10s to get notified when some of this really cool Area 51 stuff's hitting the website. They're going to be coming to a 10 at 10 on Tuesdays first, so you can sign up on our website to get those emails. That's how you find out when things are new and relisting. And hey, thanks so much for tuning in, guys.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.